Hey guys! So today we're going to talk about multiphonics, and since I already made the Contemporary Techniques 101 video, you know what this is. It's Contemporary Techniques for Composers. For those of you who are new to this channel, I have two series. I have Contemporary Techniques 101, where I talk about how to play flute and how to learn contemporary sounds on a flute perspective, so more like physical practice and the things that you need to do with your face. And then I have this series, which is much more composer-oriented, as the name implies, where I talk about writing for it, some of the things you need to know before you put them into a piece, and really the intricacies of playing new music with these techniques. So, multiphonics. First things first, always, without fail, always give a fingering. Whatever resource you used, and I do not care what it was, put the fingering in the score. You can say what reference you used, please do actually, that's great, because it means that I can go back and see if there was something else that works a little bit better that was in the same reference guide, which means that it's probably in the same kind of tonal world. But if I don't have a fingering, I am hard pressed to go find it. And to be perfectly honest, if you just tell me where you reference these multiphonics from, I don't have every reference in the book. I only have a couple books. I mostly use Robert Dick's The Other Flute and then online resources. I do have one other giant PDF, though that may have died with my last computer. But for the most part, I use the resources at hand to find multiphonic fingerings. And they might not line up with the resource that you used. So, to prevent any confusion and much flutist frustration, give a fingering. It doesn't have to be in the score. I completely understand how difficult formatting fingerings into a score is, and I also understand for like time's sake and for space sake and for formatting sake why people don't want to do it. I'm perfectly happy to write them in. And maybe there are some performers who are yelling at me right now saying, no, I want them in the score, and I also completely respect that. I'm perfectly capable of writing them in. So as long as they're in the score material somewhere, I'm good. I don't care. I also sometimes stop writing them in partway through because I've learned what the fingering is, so I don't need to remind myself. But when in doubt, put it as many places as you possibly can without driving yourself crazy in whatever editing software you use. Along those lines, be careful the references you use. I think I talked about this a bit, but things like the virtual flute are a little wonky. They're not like play-tested resources, they're more algorithms. And so you're gonna get some really uncomfortable fingerings, some stuff that's just really not easy to play, and sometimes they don't work super well. If you're using an edited like resource, so one of the many books available to you, or any like online resource like Flute Colors or Flute Expansions, those are much more like reliable resources. Think of virtual flute as like the Wikipedia of the world, where like anyone can go in to edit it. I know that's not true anymore for Wikipedia, but like you get my point. We all grew up in this era where like Wikipedia isn't a valid source, but you can use it to like find other sources. You get my point. Within that, I always recommend whenever you put multiphonics into a piece, have someone playtest it. Partially because some of these fingerings don't work super well, even if they are from a resource that's been playtested. Some of them have some quirks to them, or like do things that don't say on the page. Sometimes them are really loud or really soft. And while many of these resources do tell you that information, there is something to be said about having a real human in the room going, yeah, that'll work, that'll be fine, especially when you're doing it in context of some other music. Thinking about what it's leading into and what preceded it can change what fingerings you want. There are some things that are just really uncomfortable or aren't going to sound the way that you want them to. It's also a matter of like what color does this multiphonic have? Is it really bright and harsh? Is it really light and fluffy? Like whatever it is, you're not going to really get exactly what it is until you hear it. Books are only so great for that. So real life flutist in a room playing this thing, always your best resource. They're also probably capable of adjusting the fingerings to give you something a little bit better or more what you're going for. So it's worth just getting into a room with a player if you can and having them play test it. I know for a fact that I've definitely gotten scores just like emailed to me, be like, can you play this multiphonic and like go through it? Or I've had composers just like send me a multiphonic sound idea and like basic pitches that they'd like to show up and have me find them myself in the context of whatever they were writing. So it's definitely great to have a flutist in your back pocket to ask. Obviously, not always the case, and if that's the case, then be very, very open to the premier flutist changing things or telling you that something isn't going to work. That being said, multiphonics are very, very difficult. They're very unstable, they take a lot of practice, and not every flutist is going to be comfortable with them. I know that's true of every technique I talk about in this series, which is like 95% of the reason that the Contemporary Techniques 101 series even exists, but it is hard. And even the most experienced flutist will crack one or two in their lifetime or even in a performance. And please be kind and aware of the fact that that isn't because they're a bad performer, it's because it's hard. And it's because when adrenaline kicks in, everything in every flutist's background is telling them you want one really round, really beautiful note, not these three fluffy bullshit notes. And so we're fighting against our training. And obviously, an experienced contemporary performer has an idea of how to do that. But it's hard. It's just hard, and give your performer a lot of grace for that. It's not like oboe where the instrument is kind of just built like that and they work really well. Saxophone as well. On flute, they suck. They really just do. That being said, please use them. I'm not telling you not to. I think they have a wonderful texture, and it's one of the really cool things that people don't always realize about woodwinds is that we can play multiple pitches. Yes, it's not as easy as like playing a double stop on a violin or playing a chord on the piano, but it's really fun. So despite the difficulty, I'm not saying don't use them. One of the other things that I always talk about when talking to composers about multiphonics is to be very careful with natural multiphonics and how you notate them, because sometimes they can look like harmonics. Because if you are looking for like a low G and a mid G multiphonic, it can look a little bit like a harmonic if you notate it strangely. That's one of those things where I would like have a specific like little character that says this is a multiphonic if you're like referencing a fingering. I personally don't care if it's a natural or artificial multiphonic. I want a fingering no matter what. Even though obviously I can figure it out. For a natural multiphonic, I still want the fingering. So if you're like referencing a guide in the front matter and have like a little number or letter or whatever, that's obviously a very good indicator to me that it's multiphonic. But if you just kind of chuck two notes in there and don't say much about it, especially if like the upper note is a diamond note head or something like that, which I have seen before, that gets into like, is this a harmonic? Obviously in the case example that I gave of low G and high G and middle G, I wouldn't think it was a harmonic necessarily because those are two notes that exist in the flute range and like don't, like they're not, you would never write a harmonic middle G on the low G pitch. That's just not it's a harmonic, but it's like not gonna sound like a harmonic. But if you're doing something that's a little bit less obvious than that it's a multiphonic, then just like maybe even write multiphonic. Just like give us every chance to interpret your score correctly the first time around. and know that a lot of the time when I see a natural multiphonic and it's notated unclearly, I'm gonna go like it's like a harmonic or multiphonic game that I have to play, which isn't ideal. Obviously, if there's multiphonics like earlier in the piece and they all have the same notation, I'm an intelligent human who can figure out things. But as I've said 1,000 times before, the clearer your score is and the less guessing the performer has to do, even if it's like inferences from the rest of your notation, the better. Like, I am already doing a ton of work to figure out how to play the things that you have on the page, let alone figuring out what it is that it is on the page. So just give us some help. There's many, many jokes that probably could be made about flutists' intelligence, but I'm not going to do that because that's insulting to myself. Yeah, I think that covers most of the gist of multiphonics. It's mostly notation stuff, honestly, and the fact that they're hard. But most of the issues that I have when I see multiphonics are just the way that they're put in the score. And always put a fingering in. I'm going to say that again because I will come find you if you give me a score that does not have any fingerings. And I will refuse to play it. So, yes. I hope you guys liked this video and I hope it was helpful. There may be another longer break because I am going to Ecuador next week for a gig. And who knows what I'm going to be doing there in terms of like recording and work, because we have 3 shows in 2 cities. But that's super exciting. And as always, if you like this video, give it a like. If you're new here, subscribe, and I will see you guys very soon.